everyone, and welcome to another Scots Whay podcast. And we're recording this in the Sauchiehall Street branch of Waterstones, where later tonight Donald S. Murray, the poet and writer, will be launching, or at least it's the Glasgow launch, of his novel And the Woman Lay Dreaming, and he's going to talk to us first. Hello, Donald.
Hello, hi. It's lovely to be here.
Now, I reviewed this novel for Scots Whay. It was a very moving book for me. It's based on one specific incident, and it's an incident which you know better than I do. So, if you could just explain a little bit about the book.
It's the men. It's about when many of the men from the Western Isles, and Lewis and Harris in particular, were returning from the First World War on the 1st of January 1919, thinking that their days of conflict and loss and grief were over. But of course, the ship went down in the harbour about a mile away just from their home port. So there were actually people who were washed up on the sand on the shoreline of their own land at that times. So it is not so much about that event itself, it's about the after effects of it and how it permeated, Lewis' life in particular, and the life of my village, because even before that, Lewis had lost more men per head of population than any other part of Britain.
All right.
Yeah, so that's that is because there were an awful lot of men who were part of the Royal Naval Reserve, where the bulk of these men came from, Merchant Navy, and also had volunteered to fight in the conflict. So, for instance, I lost two great uncles. My next door neighbour lost three of his brothers in the conflict. So it had a huge effect on the place. The vast majority of houses in my village when I was growing up were occupied by spinsters and widows, all dressed from morning to night in black. And I think that had huge, so I think it was the trauma, the effects of the trauma, not just of the Iolaire, but also the First World War, permeated the whole place.
So the effect of the First World War was a huge thing anyway, and then this disaster being so offering some hope so close to land, but then that being dashed, and you can't imagine anything.
No, you can't imagine.
Horrific.
It's just it's the most awful trick that fate could ever play on people. They're just there. Some of them have written the telegrams, telling their wives they're going to be home the next morning, and they never actually turn up. So that's profound, and I think it was also a tragedy that has been barely noticed. I think there are a number of reasons for that. People didn't really talk about it.
Yes. Way
up until only about the late 70s, people began to talk about. Even then, it was a trickle of words rather than a whole conversation. So. That was an initial thing. The other, of course, is it came at the end of a conflict where there had been a great deal of loss, throughout the British Isles, and there was also the Spanish flu. People had enough of awful news, and this was just a final thing. So I think there's so many reasons why, in many ways, it was an invisible disaster.
Because I didn't hear about it till I was in my mid-30s, and this was through a friend of mine from university at the time called Rudy McIver, who we were at an event, and he got up to sing this song and he explained about the song. Yes. And my first feeling was, how do I not know about it? How has I got to this age in life and living all my years in Scotland and not know about it? But so it's interesting to you to kind of explain that.
Yeah.
Is it also, my experience of education in the 70s and in the 80s was that Scottish historical events were not really...
Well, see, that was certainly not my experience. I know that I've heard that. I was very, very lucky in my school days. I had a wonderful English teacher who was new on the block, and I had great enthusiasm for, Grassy Gibbon and Robert Burns and Edwin Muir. So that, in terms of literature, I had a great deal of knowledge. But I do believe that the silence, was largely caused by the trauma
Right. Yeah.
And the inability to speak about it, because if they did speak about it, they would lose control.
Yeah.
So that certainly in Lewis, I think that's, you know, there was that kind of an inhibition, and also probably mixed by Calvinism.
Yeah.
With Calvinism, you have to soul it.
Yes. Yes.
You have to soul it.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about was this idea of a small community having such tragedy. Because I think you're right. I think that it's almost like, well, we shut our borders to this. We close up as a community and we don't share it with anyone else. And you think that's probably...
That's what happened. And I think also, I think there's a whole host of things that, you know, that came out of that. One was... I think, you know, people who spoke the Gaelic language, for instance, you know, began to see that tongue as something that was associated with doom and despair, you know, particularly after that event. So I think that even had a psychological effect, and you know, on Gaelic speakers, possibly, you know, out with Lewis, you know. Also, you know, there was a wave of emigration afterwards, and I think there were a number of reasons for that. One was, you know, the darkness that kind of, you know, bound the whole community, but also, just as importantly, I think when men leave their own community, particularly those on farms and crofts, they find it very hard to settle down again. You know, the old American expression, you know, how are they going to settle down on the farm now that they've seen Paris? I think that's a song.
Right,
I'm probably not quoting that directly, exactly, but
it's an interesting point.
But yes, I think they want to. They've seen other parts of the world. They've seen different ways of even architecture. You know, they have the basic housing structure, which was poor in Lewis at that time. So I think that was another. There were a whole mix of reasons.
Because there's many themes in the book, and I think you've touched upon a couple there. But you've got the central character of Tormund.
Taramut. It's at Taramut. It's an A sound,
right?
And it's actually a very Norse name. It's Nordic. You know, it's after the god Thor, but somehow or other it became. In history, it became the translation for Norman. Now, what on earth it has to do with Norman, I have no idea, you know.
But he is off to war, and he has new experiences and meets different people that some people try and keep him in his place in terms of class, but also some people that fire his imagination and he starts to draw, and he starts to see that there are other possibilities than the life that was set out for him. So why did you decide to have that in the book?
I think one of the things, if I had somebody there who was a central figure who was desperate to go home, you know, in a curious way, you're cheapening the tragedy by somebody there who doesn't want to go home, who sees there are possibilities, but feels, you know, forced to by the fact that he's got this marriage, you know, there. Second, the fact that he's got a child who he probably doesn't even know at the time, and probably never gets to know because of the loss of the gap of 4 years. And you know, other things like I thought it was really important to have a character, you know, rather than have this nostalgic homesickness, but one that resented going home, and yet because of the tragedy, he is imprisoned. Well, there may be other things, and he's imprisoned by the community that he doesn't really want to be a part of.
I'm really fascinated by the structure of the book, because many people, I think, would put the tragedy at the beginning, and then the fallout would happen from that, even if it's through the years and decades or whatever. But what you've done is kind of, in a way, not turn it on its head, that's too simplistic, but there's jumps in time, there's jumps in generations. So could you talk a little bit about the structure of the book?
The structure was the hardest thing about the book. Absolutely, and getting it right was by far the hardest thing about the book. I started writing the book in January 2002. I wrote about 40,000 words then. And what I had in mind at that time was a book like John Dos Passos' USA, the work of John Dos Passos, where you have a whole lot of people experiencing kind of similar events, and yet when I was writing it, that wasn't working. It was falling apart in my hands. Though you can still see the snippets of that even throughout the book. But I came across a number of books. I mean, one of the most important one was War and Turpentine, which is a book by Stephen Hindman, which had the idea of a journal.
Right.
And I thought, yes, that's it. But I wanted in a way that also that finish up with 1st of January 1919, because what can follow that?
Yeah.
You're really badly weighting the book. You're making it very difficult. What's your climax if that is your beginning?
That's true.
And so that was, a huge issue for me in the construction of it. So it took a long, long time. Other things came in. I wanted a kind of, the 1936, which is part of it, which is partly, well, it's not my biography. Mm-hmm. It's my mother's biography.
Right.
Even though I've changed an awful lot about that. My mother's mother died when she was 7.
Right.
And herself and her brother, Archie, were shipped off to their grandparents in Tiree.
Yeah.
On the Isle of Tiree. So that, the whole idea of that, that was a very short period in her life, and she would always talk about it being the only happy period that she had in her childhood, because she was, this constant change after that. So that was it. So I switched that to Lewis, so it became when I grew up in South
Yeah, sure.
But at the same time, I switched, in the sense it became a granddad that was the most important. So there's a whole lot of changes there in that. But, there is this genesis of a child, actually in the case of 2 children, taken out of Glasgow and sent to, the Hebrides. In my mother's case, Tiree, and in the case of this book, Lewis.
Because that move is not just one which is geographical, but the cultural differences and the language differences.
Huge cultural differences, and that was it. And I always remember as a child. I mean, I was brought up in East Kilbride for the first 7 years of my life, and then I discovered civilization further north. What I remembered most, as a child, were the differences in smells. Every house at that time had a different smell. There was no spray of Pledge or anything. And people, of course, back then, Shure and even Brute 33 hadn't been discovered then. But so you did notice very different smells in a community like Lewis compared to East Kilbride.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And I was very much aware of that as a child. That's what I used to notice all the time.
So we've mentioned that there's generational shifts. So just so people are clear, how are the 3 generations related to each other?
Well, they're all, as I say, I suppose the initial is 1918, 1919. That's the major. That's the Iolaire part, and you have a man there, grappling with his, second marriage, to somebody he's lost his first wife, and he's dealing with the grief of that. And that's part of the reason he signs up for the war.
Yep.
So they are, that's the one generation. There's a grandfather there, of course, who's a difficult individual. Who actually, I won't say who it's based on, but there was somebody not in my family, but elsewhere, who I remember being very unpredictable, and you hated working anywhere near him because he seemed to change his mind every 5 minutes.
Okay.
So that was the grandfather, and so that was one generation, and that was that was the granddad, and then his son. The next generation, which is Taramud, who goes to who's the central figure of the Old Man in 1936, and he's the one who takes his grandchildren. He's lost his daughter, and he was a blacksmith, a wheelwright, also working there. And then the next generation is Alistair, who is the son, the boy in the first one, who is a Glasgow art teacher.
Yeah.
And there was a reason for that, which is a strange one, because I was trying to think about, I met somebody in my first teaching practice down here many, many years ago who I thought was supremely talented. And he was an English teacher in Albert Secondary, Springburn. But I noticed he was a fantastic artist, this guy. And it was Ricky Ross of Deacon Blue, yes. So he, in a sense, I'd always, because what I remembered about him was he was really good at art, actually. I never heard him sing at that stage. So I in a kind of, and first of all, I was going to make him a Dundonian, and then I went for a walk around Aberdeen one day, and I realised I know Aberdeen far better. Why make him a Dundonian?
Yeah, sure.
So Aberdeen, he became from Aberdeen, and I hope nobody takes it an insult against the people of Aberdeen that the Old Man is from there, from the father.
I was interested as well about these shifts around the country, because there also takes on the different language, and how that can actually cause problems, misunderstandings.
But even Rachel, the daughter, I mean, I deliberately, in a sense, she's partly metaphor in some ways, because she, through the fact that she is an elective mute, is unable to deal with language. And in a curious way, I think that is a metaphor for my native Lewis.
Right.
At sometimes, because they didn't know how to speak. They didn't know how to frame a narrative around their loss, which I think is, anyone will tell you. Psychoanalysts, psychotherapists will tell you, if you can frame a narrative around your grief, if you can express it, you're halfway towards healing.
Yeah.
And in a way, that's what Alice, the art teacher is doing here. Alistair is looking at his own life, and he's looking for healing, and he's writing the book. Is
that in a way an attempt, what you are attempting to do with the novel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Provides.
That's, what struck me about it, and it's happened with other, we briefly spoke about Alan Massey, other historical novels which are a fiction as much as fact, or more in fact, is that they can often give people a greater insight into something than
the factual. No, I agree with. I agree with that.
And by taking this individual story, it can actually give you a kind of greater shared truth, I think.
Well, that's why I hope. That's why I hope. I mean, we're always slightly inadequate to that task. No matter how well you write, no matter how long you've been writing, you always feel slightly. But I'm hoping that I achieve that. I will fail, and another reason I used as a Glasgow art teacher, rather than a native Hebridean to use the story, or Glasgow art teacher of Aberdonian descent, is it allowed me to make mistakes.
Yes.
Yeah. And there's sometimes deliberate mistakes in the book.
Yes.
For instance, he writes about the church. He calls the church the kirk.
Yeah.
No Lewis person ever calls the church the kirk. It's always the church in English. So that, in a sense, that was a deliberate error. And there are a number of others, that are scattered through the book, but that also allowed me to get off with perhaps one or two others.
And I suppose that one of the things about writing on any real life incident, but particularly one which is so tied into people's ways, is there's a worry about how people will take it.
Of course there is, and so in a way, and I think my fellow Lewis people will say, and I've seen this in my books before, they'll turn to you and they'll say, Whay, who are the shouldn't care, I shouldn't care right to see your. They'll say, Donald says, you got that wrong. That's wrong in the book. And of course, if you're writing a book of, say, 70,000 words, if you don't make a mistake somewhere in your narrative, you're heading up for Superman status.
Yes, absolutely.
And so in a way that allows me to create a wall and become, much more defensive. It gives me a wall of defence,
yes,
rather than, and I think particularly in a small community.
Yeah.
I think you can. There's probably enough places you can hide away in Glasgow from that, but there's
it's when you're dealing with something on such a small
area.
And have you had feedback about the book?
Oh, I think people love the book. I generally, as I say, I had kind words from certain reviewers, and people have, both throughout. So I'm really gratified about the response I'm getting from people.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about the kind of clash of the languages and what you were trying to say about that. So, because do you think that has hurt Scotland as a nation?
Yes.
Right, okay.
No doubt about that. I think there's a lot of things that hurt about Scotland, about a nation. I think, for instance, that there is this historical myth that, the Scottish Gaelic came in from Dalriada and it was a kind of invading force.
Mm-hmm.
As I said, there's no evidence for that apart from the Venerable Bede. It is, Gaelic communities and Pictish communities often existed side by side.
Right.
Long before the Kingdom of Dalriada. I can't remember the year that happened, but that is, so I think that's been one of our national myths, that it's in a sense an alien tongue. Gaelic existed in every single part of Scotland, with the exception of Orkney, Shetland, the Borders, and a little bit of Caithness. And my goodness, to make a great deal of this little this little bit of Caithness. The rest of Scotland has evidence of Gaelic, and for instance, Aberdeenshire. Sometimes you get the ones that come from P-Celtic, Pictish, Welsh, whatever it is, background. Almost alongside those that come from a Q-Celtic, the Gaelic language. So that's one. So I do think that there are national myths about our tongue.
Yeah.
The letters page of the Scotsman, for instance, would show you that day upon day. Sorry, I don't know if that was.
No, it is. Well, it does absolutely, because I think there are these myths which have been allowed to permeate and
perpetuate themselves.
Yes, absolutely, and whether whether you could say Scots is the language or whether it's dialect or
I agree with that.
And that you've Doric.
Doric, yes, which I used in the book, and I love, and I'm Shetland now, and I love listening to the dialect there. And I'm never going to master it. I'm never even going to attempt to master that. You know what I mean?
What I mean is, I don't see why we can't celebrate all these different types of languages and people write in them, and rather than saying, we need one united. Yes. We don't need one united.
No,
as long as these don't fight against each other.
It provides a great deal of creativity. The number of writers, for instance, at the moment that come from the Western Isles. You have Ian Stephen, Angus Peter Campbell, Ulster Mackintosh, Malcolm Mackay, and Kevin McNeill, a huge number of writers from the Western Isles. More, Neil Campbell. Did I say Neil Campbell too? Who's the poet? And I did say Angus Peter. And I'm worried that I may miss.
You will. I mean, there are so many. That makes the point.
That makes the point that I may miss some out. When I was growing up in Stornoway, there was something really wonderful about the mix of tongues.
Yeah.
You had Gaelic, and I was a hostel boy in Stornoway. We also used to mingle it in slang with Victorian English. We never, sat up from a chair. We always levitated. We always perambulated downtown. There was a fair amount of, the legacy of RAF's speech in the town. It was wonderfully enriching, and I think it is that enrichment, that you get that's what leads to, when you get languages counter-clashing, it makes people realise that words are not fixed.
Yes. Yeah, they're never fixed.
They're never fixed. And so you get wonderful enrichment for that. So I think, the more cultural diversity we have in terms of language, the more creative people are going to be. And I don't think that's just in language, by the way. The number of singer-songwriters that are coming out from astronomy at the moment, C. MacLeod, Ian Morrison, and there was another guy I heard the other day. I'll definitely miss somebody out there. There's a guy, Casilla McKeever, Willie Campbell. It's remarkable, talent.
Absolutely, and actually, because I cover quite a lot of pop music on the site, and there's a lot of pop bands as well coming out from the
islands. And I do think that is, and the more we open our doors to other tongues, there does seem to be, with fear within Scotland that, we never spoke Gaelic here, is something I hear. Well, it was a way. Gaelic was a way of responding to our landscape, our history, our environment. And, in a curious way, you don't get that from French, German, Mandarin, Chinese, Spanish. It's much more rooted here. It's much more a response to the geography of Scotland.
Absolutely, and everyone's language is related to that. Whether it's urban Glaswegian,
exactly.
So talk about the stanks or the smoke, and all these different things.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And I do think it's I think to create walls around language is incredibly destructive, and it's incredibly insular and parochial. Who cares? In a way, if you never spoke that long tongue there, it actually arose. I'm talking about the Caithness people here, or similar people. It arose in response to the environment that's within their country and not far. Why not use it? Why not utilise it?
Well, another aspect that you touch upon in the book, which again could perhaps, a lot of the things you just mentioned could be applied to it, is religion.
Yes.
Now, you said perhaps one of the reasons the story hadn't travelled was that Calvinist feeling of you have to throw it, you have to just get on with it, what's the point in complaining, what's the point in that? And there's a great bit for me where you compare the idea of religious instruction in Glasgow at the time to what was and the different levels. If you do the Lord's Prayer, you're fine.
I know.
Well, I can still proper instruction. You know your text and know your scripture.
But and do you know something? I think in some ways that was quite enriching.
Yeah.
Because I know the language of the Psalms. I know the language. We had to learn, Psalms. We had to learn paraphrases. I don't even know if you know what paraphrases are. It's oh God of Bethel, by whose hand I people. And catechisms, and half the time I didn't know the meaning of things. The rhythm of Psalms particularly is wonderfully lyrical, and really, even to this day, when I hear the Psalms, my father was a precentor in church.
Right.
And there is a power to them. You can see why they've lasted for hundreds and hundreds of years, because there's a power to the words. It's probably, outside of, classical myth might be a comparable thing, but that's, the language is such, the power of the language is that's one reason why it's
these are almost our Greek tragedies, these are that kind of...
That kind of thing, yes, I agree, I think they are our Greek tragedies in Scotland, I know that there is somebody who goes around saying the Odyssey was set in the Hebrides, and Corrie Vrecken was Scylla, but I think we can dismiss that one.
So you said that you got the idea of using the journals from
a Dutch writer.
Why did you think that was a good way of doing that? Why do you think that was a good way of telling the story?
Because, to be honest, I couldn't see the way he would have come out with it aloud.
Right.
Because he would perhaps have written down his private thoughts, and I think that they did do that time and time again. it seemed to me that the gag of time and place was so firmly in place, firmly there, that they would not have spoken to anything. So in many ways, the journals were a confessional.
Yeah.
Just of what was going through his mind.
The reason I ask is my experience, and it's quite a limited experience of people in my family that went to war and came back, was that they were often very reluctant to talk about it
that's
at
same
all.
At all, yes, and that's it. And so that, I think, that's why the journals, and as I say, when I read that book, I thought, that's it.
Yeah.
That's how you would do it. Now, as I say, the book is very different from mine. It doesn't have the same kind of time structure, but the author of War in Paris and I owe a tremendous debt to. He provided a way of accessing this story.
Another thing that fascinated me about it, and you crammed so much into the book, but is the theme of class.
Yes.
Because there's now he's an officer.
Yes, Foster.
Yeah, who does. Now is he he's not middle class, he's kind of officer class.
Oh, he is officer class, and I also quite liked. He's Foster, and I had him from Bandon in, I think, County Cork, which I know the place. He knows I do know the place, which was, Graham Norton comes from around there. Right. And again, he comes from this Protestant. It was the only place with a Protestant working class outside of Dublin. Dublin, of course, Shauna Casey would have been very much Protestant working class. So I used him as a kind of way in, because he was also, by the time, of course, the war is over, he can foresee the day when he no longer returns to Ireland.
Yeah.
That he himself is going to become an emigrant. So that was another reason for using that, because I think one of the things I remember reading a wonderful book by, I think, a guy called Joseph O'Neill, called Blood Dark Track. Right, I don't know it. And it is Joseph O'Neill, who's the guy who wrote The Neverland. That's probably his most famous book. He had a Turkish grandfather on one side who was involved in terrorism or revolutionary terrorism against the state there. He had another one who was involved in County Cork, for the Iolaire. And so he came from this but he writes an awful lot about the clearances of working class Protestants from that area, which is not something that generally is not really spoken about. There was a huge dilemma. The work of Sebastian Barry, again, which I think is wonderful. He talks about the Catholic middle classes, who were somehow or other indebted to the state, and a lot of them too left. So I found that interesting, because again there is this idea about he doesn't see he has any place in the country because of the events. And in a curious way that mirrors Taramon's own feelings about. So
although they are from very different backgrounds. They see some kind of
similarity together. So the two.
And it really is Foster who kind of fires the imagination and the artist in
the other. Yes, that's And the other thing is, I know. I've been in County Cork a few times. I know County Cork, and so that became easier to write about than it would have been an English officer, whom I don't think they would have the same bond at all because of the differences.
Okay, so as you come to the end and you know that you're going to have to tackle depicting the actual sinking itself, which is very visceral and it's an incredibly powerful piece of writing, that must have been difficult to write.
That was really difficult to write. There's two types of writing. The writers, someone said to me, there are pods and peds. I don't know if have you heard that distinction?
No.
Pods tend to sit down all the time when they're writing. They're trapped in their own wee private pod, and that's great. I wish I was like that. I'm a ped, which is pedestrian. Pedestrian in the true sense of the word. And so the ped thing was, I walked it out. I walked out everything. what would I do in that situation? What would I be seeing around me? And I used,
That's really interesting.
John MacLeod's book, which is an excellent book, which is the first history in English of the Iolaire going down, and I used that in a sense to plot my own movements out. I didn't do it in any diagrammatic way. I'm saying, where would I be standing at that point? Where would he? What would be happening?
Sure.
And yet, by having a Glasgow art teacher there, I was liberated in a way because I could actually get it wrong.
Yeah, of course.
I wasn't quite as crucial to get it right. So I kind of imagined it, and the other thing is I wanted to do it as accurate as possible because I knew some of the men, who had been on the Iolaire. I knew some of them. I knew, the patch from our district who I used to see walking. I think he died in his 90s, but he was an incredible. He was also a pedant. He used to walk an awful lot, and I remember seeing John Finlay MacLeod in his boatyard. My Uncle Norman taking me into the shed. I don't know if I remember mentioned that in the book, but he said to me, he says, Donald, he said, Donald, how do you have gascoch? You're going to meet a hero.
Right.
And so I went into the boatyard, and it was this slight figure, with the standard, scrubbed wood type of haircut, and cloth cap, and dungarees, and a shirt, and I think he had a fag in his mouth.
Right.
And I remember thinking to myself, I had gone in there imagining, a rather large heroic figure, and I remember feeling really disappointed, at the age of 7 or 8. And I saw him a number of times after that. I do remember
that initial
response, and even I think the other thing is it had a tremendous effect on me, that place, because they were working on the boat, and of course there was a smell of wood shavings. So I think the smell was also, part of the reason why it stayed in my head. There was that smell all around the building. So I thought that was also, that was another reason it stayed in my head, for quite some time.
So, as we know, yesterday was the 100th anniversary of Armistice, and I'm sure this is having its 100th anniversary, obviously.
Yeah, in 1st of January,
was that one of the reasons for writing the book, or was it just...
Well, the very fact that I started in 2002...
tells its own story.
But it seemed almost as if the last while you had, in a way, the fact that I knew I wanted to finish it. And I'd finished a book called The Dark Stuff, which was also quite a grueling experience, because the end of it is about Nazi Germany and the concentration camp. So when I started off, that I knew I had, so that gave me a real deadline to work to. And I was very, very lucky in a number of people, and I was lucky in having a guy called Drew Ratter up in Shetland who said, you've got to have a lot more about the boats, the actual war itself. So I went down here in Waterstones in Glasgow, and I spent a whole afternoon just going through the First World War book. And there's very, very little about men's experience in the First World War at sea. It is all on the grand strategy. But I found, I think, 2 books that worked, and I thought, oh, wow, take that one. And I didn't want an exact thing. What I wanted an idea was the scope of that war. So you got Jutland, you got the Mediterranean, you got off the coast of South America, you got the Battle of Falklands, and I wanted that sense of, just the enormity of that war. So Drew Ratter was extremely helpful in challenging me on that one, and I think it is helpful to have people in challenge.
Yes, absolutely.
Craig Hillsley of Saraband book, amazing man, and he helped me because the journalists were slightly more loose and told shift that.
Okay.
And I thought, that works. Yeah, you're right. And finally, I want to pay tribute to a friend of mine, Alec Clunas. Now it's because I sent it to Alec Clunas, who was at one time the literature development officer for Shetland Arts, and then went to work in the Poetry Archive down, which is based in London, and he was also working at Teicharshafa in Lochmaddy, North Youth. And Alec was a special friend of mine, and he said, "We've got to do something with that opening. The rest of it is terrific." He says, "Change the opening." And when he did that, I thought, yeah, you know how you know instinctively when someone is right.
Yeah.
And I thought, yes. And so he was tremendously helped. Unfortunately, he himself has passed away, and it was actually very, very shortly after that piece of advice being given. So that's it. So these, there are many other people I am indebted to. We keep thinking a book is an individual enterprise. It's no.
No, absolutely.
It's not.
Absolutely.
In a sense, I had this conversation. You're writing a book, especially that one, on behalf of a community.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're using your talents for that community. And in a sense, if you have faith, talents haven't been given to you as a person. They have been given to you to use for others, hopefully.
Well, I think it is definitely a book about the community, but I think on a larger scale it's a book about Scotland in general, and I think that makes it very, very interesting. It's been longlisted for the Highland Book Prize.
Yes.
And I was having a look at that long list.
It's fantastic books in it. Yes, I was saying one of the few book lists I wouldn't mind losing to.
Well, I know what you mean.
Yes, it's and I think a few years ago you wouldn't have got a list like that with any connections to the Highlands and Islands. There's been an explosion.
Yeah. I think that's right.
And I think it's great, And not
just from people who live there, but also from people who have gone
there. Exactly. And and I also think Saraband, with the wonderful book, his bloody project by Graham McCrae Burnett is partly responsible for that. It's wonderful to see that change. Wonderful to see that.
Absolutely. And they're books of all types.
Yes, that's right. Yes, it's. So I do love that.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to leave it, Donald. But thank you so much for doing this.
I hope I made at least a smidgen of sense.
Absolutely.
So
I'm really pleased to talk to you about it, because I think the book's just absolutely terrific.
Okay, thanks very much.
And best of luck with the launch today.
Okay, thank you very much.
And we'll be back soon with somebody completely different.